What actually do we mean by a crisis? A crisis is a time of intense danger and difficulty. It's often abrupt and sudden and negative. In relation to crisis counselling, an important part is that the person seeking help is also struggling to cope with that crisis. Let's now briefly look at some examples of crises. These are by no means an exhaustive list though. Difficulties within a family can be a crisis, such as a family breakdown, divorce or separation. Natural disasters such as earthquakes, volcanoes, fires, floods, landslides and so on can also be crises. Sometimes crises can be caused by a lack of resources in a community. They can bring about crises such as a lack of food, protection from harm or crime, a lack of clean water, a lack of electricity, power, and so on. Any sort of conflict between individuals, groups of individuals, or at the extreme, warfare, can cause crises as well. Economic changes in an area or to an individual or family can become a crisis too. A person may lose their job, which can represent a financial crisis for them, or a country may have financial and economic difficulties. Life events can lead to crises in a person's life. Events, not always negative, such as starting a new job, having a baby, or so on, can also bring difficulties with them and change, and that change can result in crises. Other life events can lead to negative things, difficulties causing great distress, such as bereavement, suicide, or being a victim of crime. Crisis counselling is an intervention that helps individuals deal with crises by providing support and assistance. Crisis counselling has several distinct goals. First, to mitigate the impact of the crisis, making it easier to deal with, or less severe. Second, to facilitate normal recovery. When people experience abnormal events such as a crisis counselling can help the person cope and deal with that crisis, and then recover over a period of time in a normal way. Third, returning to normal adaptive functioning is another goal of crisis counselling. Adaptive functioning are skills that are necessary for us to cope with the demands of our environment in an effective way. For example, skills like how we communicate with others. Good crisis counselling is going to help people get back to a point where they're communicating properly and normally with others. After a crisis, people can experience a wide range of psychological and social problems. These problems may happen immediately, but sometimes they can take a while to develop after the crisis. For example, a person may go into shock after a crisis, and take time to finally respond to that crisis. They may also experience other difficulties, such as changes to their routine. Emergency services deal with problems that arise after a crisis. Some problems can be emergencies where the person requires immediate medical, psychological, or physical help. Others may take time to develop. Crisis specialists will evaluate a crisis and then give advice on the steps to take. Some events require emergency assistance, such as dangerous, threatening, or violent situations, self-harm or suicidal behaviour. Often crisis problems require support within 24 hours of the crisis. Crisis specialists will evaluate a crisis and determine support which is required within that 24-hour period. After a crisis, the crisis professional should look at 3 areas of the client's response to the crisis. The first area is the affective state, the second, their behaviour, and the third, their cognitive functioning. What then is affective state? Affect is a person's emotional behaviour. Abnormal or impaired affect can be a sign that the person is feeling emotionally out of control or unbalanced. The crisis counsellor can help the person to regain control and express their feelings in a more realistic and appropriate way. The next thing to assess is behavioural functioning. The crisis specialist should observe the client's behaviour. Look at whether they're struggling to breathe. Are they pacing? Are they staring blankly? Or acting withdrawn and unresponsive? These things will suggest a problem with behavioural functioning. One way to start the recovery there is for the crisis specialist to help the person by helping them control their breathing. The third thing to assess is the cognitive state, the way the person thinks. The crisis specialist should assess whether the client is thinking in a logical and coherent way. Do their words make sense? Are their words logical? When dealing with a crisis, the crisis specialist will follow various strategies initially to help the client deal with that crisis. The counsellor should aim to help the client become aware of the feelings that they may be repressing or denying after the crisis. This is an important step as it helps the person recognise that something has happened and that it's normal to respond. Catharsis is allowing a client to vent their thoughts through feelings in a safe place. After a crisis, a person may have intense feelings and thoughts that may not have been able to be expressed. Let them do that through catharsis. Often in a crisis, the crisis specialist may be the only person who is present to support the person suffering the crisis. The specialist should help that person to share how they're feeling, to understand they're not being unreasonable. A counsellor should encourage the individual to reframe the problem and try to see what's happened from a new perspective. This isn't easy, obviously, straight after a crisis, but it helps. Counsellors should try to help clients focus on what's happening after a crisis. Clients can feel out of control, but helping the person focus on the situation and find realistic ways to deal with that situation is a step in the right direction. For example, offer a person who has nowhere to stay your help to find solutions for that evening. People who are in the midst of a crisis may need guidance or direction in a very practical way. They may need information about services, resources, or things to support them in this difficult situation, even where to get a meal. We've looked at the first steps to support a person in a crisis. Depending on what the crisis is and how the person responds to it, and the resources that they might have access to, that support they have received on a short-term basis may be required to extend and be very long-term as well.